y'all, it is Nikki. Welcome back to the channel. Let's talk about the fateful chapter 23. So sometimes when you're writing, you have weeks where the chapters just flow and everything is going so well. You feel exactly what your characters are going to say and do next, and it's just so easy. This was not one of those weeks. I came up against a chapter, a revision of a chapter that ended up just kind of bringing my entire writing process to a standstill and made this week like really annoying writing-wise. It didn't help that I had a super busy couple weeks and I really didn't have a ton of time to squeeze in the revision for this chapter, but it was also just a really difficult editing process. So let me take you back a little bit. I had a complete rough draft, and chapter 23 was sort of a transitional chapter in between like my fun and games phase and my climax. Not a high action chapter, but a lot of conversation happens in it, a lot of travel. It gets my characters from A to B and sets them up for sort of like the disaster, destruction, devastation phase that heads into the climax. I was like okay with it. It was fine. It was functional. The only problem was that there was like a tiny plot hole, or like not even plot hole, more like a plot crevice that if a reader noticed it, they could kind of crack open the story a little bit. So I wanted to address that, and I brainstormed with another writer on ways that we could kind of cover our bases there so that the story didn't have that kind of hole in it. We came up with some ideas, actually a lot of ideas. I came away from the meeting with like my mind just whirling. I had lots of plans, but when I went to try and implement it, it just ended up being really difficult. Not just because like rewriting can be hard sometimes, but because I felt like it was getting a bit tangential, like we were trying too hard or sort of overcomplicating this plot hole, and that maybe it could be addressed in a much simpler way. But I still wanted to try these ideas because they were a lot of fun. I ended up just hacking up this chapter and getting just so overwhelmed and stressed about it. I had a document that was like all these severed parts of different versions of the chapter like stitched together. Some of it made sense and some of it was like, this doesn't feel like it's playing well, and I can't really tell if it doesn't work or if I just don't really like it that much. I really hate that. That's such an icky feeling when you have like a bunch of just pieces of different versions of a scene mashed together and you don't have something cohesive that you're happy with, because it just feels like such a daunting task to overhaul the whole thing and make it into something that you will like as a unit. But that, I have to say, is one thing that I really love about Google Docs that I've been trying to make better use of. When you're using Google Docs, as long as you are signing into the internet pretty regularly to save all your progress, you end up with a list of all the drafts, all the versions of your draft from all the different writing sessions you've had. So I often find myself leaning back on that when I've made a change and then decide like, ooh, I don't think this is working. I want to go back to before I added this, but after I added that, and I can find that version in my version history and just restore that version, which is what I ended up using. It was driving me crazy, so I restored an old version on my main draft document so that at least I'd have something clean and finished there. And then I opened a separate document just to work on this chapter and perform my surgery on it. And by the time I finished that, I could then put it back into the main draft document and feel like, okay, I've accomplished something. So that was frustrating and a little bit stressful this week, honestly. What I ended up with is something that I think is functional. I think it works. I think it incorporates some of our ideas without taking them like too far or getting too off track. I do think it's a little bit long, especially for like a transitional chapter where there's not a lot of action happening, but it's also a chapter that has a lot of dialogue in it. So I know that dialogue takes up page time. I'm trying not to stress too much about that. It was very good practice though for dealing with scenes when things are not working well. When you do have to revise and you have to troubleshoot. The troubleshooting part especially is very tricky, but I learned some things. For one, the Google Doc tip is just super helpful across the board. Make sure you keep all your drafts, organize your different stages of the process so that if something isn't working, you can go back to one before. But also, and I think I kind of already knew this, but it's always good to be reminded of it in a practical way. Like sometimes troubleshooting is like a trial and error process. I had to try a bunch of things. I had to try incorporating new ideas into a scene I already had, rewriting the beginning of a scene, pulling a conversation from another and putting it in and then taking it out because it didn't work. I had to try a bunch of stuff and it was messy and chaotic, and I don't like messy and chaotic, but in the end I ended up with something that is cohesive and that works, I think. It took time. It took opening up up a separate draft so that I could just riff a bit and figure out what works and what doesn't. Often, I didn't end up doing that in this case, but when I'm working on other projects, what I've done in the past is make a list for every chapter that is giving me trouble of the things that work and the things that I like, the things that I feel are necessary, and the things that for some reason aren't sitting right with me. And often what ends up happening is I end up seeing, okay, this isn't even necessary in the scene, so I can actually remove this, or this part that is really bothering me would actually fit better down here instead, so I don't even have to put this in this scene. Often it just gives me a little bit more clarity, it gives me a little more distance from the scene, and I can just see the details just as they are that are working, and the details that are like, okay, this isn't working, now how can I fix it? There is something satisfying about going through that whole messy process and then coming out with a finished product that is not messy. I just want to encourage anybody who is going through that phase right now and is really overwhelmed because it just seems like kind of a mess and you're not sure what you're going to end up with. Just keep working on it, keep troubleshooting. It's going to be messy, that's totally fine. Get some advice, get some consultation from other people that understand what's going on in your story, brainstorm some ideas, and don't be afraid to try a few things before you find the right solution to your story problem. So it turned out okay, and some other awesome things happened this week too. For one, my brother met his Kickstarter goal, so thank you to everybody who checked that out. I'm really excited to see what the finished product looks like. It's going to be really, really cute. And for another, I did something cool this week. Clued Up Games did a Beauty and the Beast themed, like, interactive, what do you even call it? Interactive escape room scavenger hunty kind of thing in a city near me. So I did that with a bunch of friends. We were walking around the downtown of this city. I was dressed as Belle from Beauty and the Beast, solving this mystery on our phones. We probably looked ridiculous, but we had a lot of fun, and I was really glad that I got the chance to do it. I've been wanting to do it for a really long time. Missed my opportunity to do Alice in Wonderland, which I'm still sad about, but Beauty and the Beast is good too. And that was my week. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, do not forget to spend some time in the clouds today.